Hello and welcome to Photokina TV. You have heard about calibrating cameras, about calibrating monitors, about color management, and you probably have heard about it at different occasions, different things. And one gets the impression that it's a lot of different things. And I have someone in the show, Tobie from Datacolor today, who will show us that we can bring it all together. Bring it all together in a product that you brought, in a product box as a bundle. What is it?
Well, this is Datacolor's newest release, is SpyderCAPTURE Pro, and what this is a bundle of devices and products whose purpose is to control your color and your capture process through to your display process. So it includes the standard Spyder that you would use for calibrating all of your various display devices, and our range of capture tools that are for the front end of the digital workflow, all in one box.
The box is right here. Let's just have a quick look, so to give you an impression, to the viewers an impression of what we're talking about. So, very neat. Look at the finish. Spyder checker. We have talked about this in a show at Photokina 2 years ago.
In fact, that was the introduction of the product. The first time anyone saw it was on this show 2 years ago.
We shot it the evening before the release. That was
Indeed.
A really hot product then, and still is. There's a Spyder down there. There's a SpyderCAPTURE over here, and if we tilt the whole thing, there's a magical device which we're going to talk about in a moment. Now, color management, calibration of cameras happens along the workflow of a photographer.
Yeah, we all have to admit these days that our life consists of a digital workflow, and that digital workflow, either we rule it or it rules us, and the real goal of color management is to support that workflow and to move from one device or one place to the next successfully. So if you think of it as a stone bridge made of these nice stone arch blocks, though you're buying those big blocks from companies like Apple and Adobe and Canon, but the load shifting between those blocks all happens with the color management, because you can't move from your camera to your monitor or your monitor to your printer without proper color management, or the results will be inconsistent and very time consuming.
Okay, let's move along that workflow, that chain, and start at the very beginning, which is the camera.
It is indeed, and one of the things we find that you need to calibrate with a camera is your autofocus. Now, as cameras get better, more of us actually use the autofocus. And as we use the autofocus, we find that, well, it's not always as clear and as sharp as we'd like it to be at the focal plane. So you need some kind of tool to determine where the zone of focus actually occurs, and that's what this little tool is. It's a flat, very sharp, very high contrast black and white target, and you put your camera at its smallest aperture number for the lens you have on, and you shoot this target in autofocus mode, and it will grab right on.
Let's show how it would work, to give the viewers an impression. Maybe this camera over there can show it. I would aim my camera at the target, do the autofocus.
Absolutely.
Take the result and have a look at it. And we can show you a typical result from a camera. What does this tell me now?
Well, what you need to focus on is you have a number 1 behind the 0 line and a number 1 in front of it, and as you look in closer, you see that the one behind is not sharp and the one in front is sharp. In fact, it's probably sharper than the 0. So clearly this is a front-focused image, and if it's taken by shooting the target, then that's defining your current focal point for this target to be front focus. Now, with the particular camera you've taken this with, all we can do is test the autofocus. However, there are about 40 models on the market now where you can actually micro-adjust the autofocus. So in fact, the new Hasselblad H5D is one of those cameras, and unfortunately the Nikon D600, which was also announced at the show, is not going to be one of the cameras that have that. So clearly Nikon feels that the ability to micro-focus your camera is something they're holding for the D800 and above.
But that still leaves you the option to send it back to service, and they will do the adjusting for you.
Precisely. With any camera that does not have a user function for autofocus adjustment, this is the tool that you use to convince your camera company that you need an adjustment. You send them the image and say, I'd like this to focus on center. But things get more flexible as you deal with the cameras where you can do it yourself. And with the latest Canons, the 5D Mark III and the latest 1D, there's actually the capability to autofocus a zoom lens at its shortest setting and at its longest setting at 2 separate adjustments. So you'd use this target twice with that. And while we make our products kind of for scientific purposes, photographers are very creative and they tend to use them for more creative purposes. So for instance, a fashion or glamour photographer finds that the high contrast zone in the face is the eye, and so the autofocus focuses on the eye. What the glamour photographer wants is the eye to be sharp and the nose to be reasonably sharp, and does not care if the ear is out of focus. So in that very shallow plane that you use for glamour and fashion, you want front focus. Now what you would do with this tool for front focus is you would simply take that zone, and instead of centering it on 0, you would move it forward just enough so that you would get a little better focus on the nose and a little less focus on the eye. Now if you're shooting landscape or architecture, what you really want is the plane of the building and that which is beyond it in focus rather than that which is in front of it. So the most creative thing you can do with LensCal is to take a camera such as the classic lens for both Nikon and Canon is the 70-200. But at 70, what you tend to shoot is people. At 200, what you tend to shoot is scenes. So what I actually do with my 70-200 now is move the focus forward at the 70 end and move it backward a hair at the 200 end, so I'm getting the optimal zone for the kind of shooting that you do with those 2 different focal lengths.
Cool. Well, let's assume camera is calibrated, the autofocus is calibrated, sorry, not the camera, the autofocus is calibrated. What's next in the workflow?
Well, once I can trust my autofocus, I'm ready to actually consider shooting something. So let's take the next toy out of the toy box here, and that would be this Spyder Cube. Now this is one of the least expensive products that Datacolor has ever made, but it's also one of the most useful, and it has a wide range of uses. The original use, and the one is most often documented, is to use this for adjusting your raw images. And it's a wonderful tool for that because it has card black and absolute black, so you can zone the tuxedo zone in the image, make sure you have enough detail in the blacks. It also has primary and secondary surfaces with white and gray on them. Now the primary whites tell you, first off, that you haven't overexposed your whites, and second off, that there's a difference between them, because if those 2 whites are identical, what is going to happen is you'll have no detail in a wedding gown. Now on the little sphere at the top, there are these specular highlights. They're the same specular highlights you want to see in an eye, and those are supposed to burn out. If those do not blink on your preview on the back of your camera, then you're shooting a low key scene and you probably need to adjust your settings. So while the only thing you can't fix in RAW is overexposure and lost whites, it's still best to optimize in camera and then adjust later with the actual RAW process. So instead of starting to use the cube when I get to the RAW adjustment phase, I actually start to use the cube before I ever start shooting. The first thing I do with it is I set it up on a light stand where the model's going, and I build my lighting based on the cube. Now that's a very convenient solution because it's 2 steps closer to the actual image than a light meter is. And you don't need kind of the arcane knowledge that most of us take for granted with light meters is not necessarily something that new photographers have any feel for. So this is a tool that can tell you about whether the lighting from both sides is the same color, the same intensity, and help you to set up your lighting if you're doing controlled lighting. Then the second thing you're going to do with this cube is you're going to hold it right up in the front of the camera where it can't even focus on it and take a single shot of it. And that shot will be used to force the white balance on your camera. Now, the reason you do that, if you're shooting RAW, you don't care about your camera white balance, you can adjust that later, but you do want to be able to trust the previews that you see on the back of your camera, and you can't trust those since they're built from the JPEG until you have adjusted your white balance. So you're going to take that one blurred close-up shot under the lighting you're working with, and you're going to set that as your white balance photo. Once you've done that, you'll move this back to arm's length or even out on an extension and shoot it again. Now this image is going to now tell you more than it would before you white balanced. And you're going to use that image to make sure you can see both blacks. You may need to take a hoodman loop and put it over the viewfinder on your camera in order to see blacks in bright light conditions. But you check your blacks, you check your whites, you check your grays, and the amazing thing about this is this tool makes the histogram a meaningful device, because a histogram only shows you whatever's in your image, but if you have known entities in your image, then suddenly you can actually read the histogram and it becomes useful. For instance, if I'm out in the sun and I've forgotten to bring a hoodman loop with me, and I can't distinguish whether I'm seeing my blacks or whether my blacks are being clipped, I can look at the histogram, and I should see two distinct spikes, one for the black trap and one for the black face. Similarly, if my lighting is flat, I'm going to have one white spike. If my lighting has some depth to it, I'm going to get two white bands.
All right.
Similarly with the gray bands. And I want the gray bands in the middle. If they're too high or too low, I know my exposure could use some adjustment. So this is, in some ways...
All this in a little cube like this.
Yeah, so when people first look at this device, what they tend to say is, what a strange looking, odd looking little bauble. And when you explain to them that your primary and secondary light sources are being captured without you even paying attention to which is which, and that you have all this highlight and shadow information, and that Ansel Adams would love this because you can literally zone system from it, then slowly they begin to realize this is not a random and strange little object. It's actually quite cleverly designed to do things you need to do. And the one warning I would give photographers about this is like salt peanuts. It's addictive. Once you use it, you can't live with just one. You're going to own 4 or 5. You're going to need one in every camera bag, in your vest, and 2 or 3 in the studio.
There's not enough space for 4 in there.
Well,
let's move on to a device that Ansel Adams would not care about.
Are you speaking of this one?
Yes.
This is the Spyder Checker.
But it's color. Ansel Adams shot
color.
in black and white.
Oh, you had to do that to me. What I'm now going to show you is that on the back of every color checker is a black and white target.
Okay. So this is the side Ansel Adams would like. This one he wouldn't care about much. Although, I mean, he was also pre-visualizing how the colors were showing up in black and white later.
Were he alive today, he would be doing digital at the cutting edge, and he'd be a hacker.
Okay.
But the point is that you can turn both these cards over and turn this into a tool that's excellent for studio, it's excellent for gray balance, it's excellent for video, because once you have these both set to the gray side, you can not only gray balance each camera in your studio or on your shoot with it, you can then force the exposure on each of them as well, because what happens here is there are more light patches at the top, more dark patches at the bottom. If you force your exposure up here, it will choke down a bit. If you force your exposure down there, it will open up a bit. So you can set gray balance and force your exposure with this tool. Then the third thing you can do with it for video, we never intended it for this, is you can then do your audio sync from it.
I can just recommend you to take a look at the Photokina show we did on this 2 years ago, because it's explained in detail. There's so much you can do with it.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to the last toy in the box. It's not a toy, it's a super device.
Well, I have to think of this as a toy box, I'm sorry, and photographers would love to get this for Christmas. This is a Spyder. It's the latest generation of Spyder, a Spyder 4. It is the flagship product from Datacolor. If you leave watching this program with only one piece of information, it should be that the basis of all color management is display calibration. And if you're only going to do one thing for color management, calibrate your monitors. Now this device will calibrate CRT and LCD monitors. With the software that comes with it, it will also calibrate projectors. We have free applications that can be downloaded from the App Store for calibrating iPads, for calibrating iPhones. We're working on Android. It's a little more challenging. And then there's software that can be purchased to go with this. It's a cross-grade that will give you Spyder 4 HD TV HD. I got my initials in the wrong order there. Spyder 4 TV HD. And what that gives you is the capability of calibrating televisions, which don't have a computer connected to them and don't have a video card in them, but you can calibrate them via
through the menu.
Exactly. Now, that's important. Well, we all have a TV and we might as well see the color right, but what it really matters with that is that all photographers are now videographers. And if you're going to do video, you need to be able to edit on a calibrated monitor, but you also need to trust what you're seeing on what's called a reference display. Now, a video reference monitor costs more than my car. And so clearly when I edit video, I don't do it on a $40,000 video reference monitor. So the answer is you take a reasonable grade of LCD and you use it for that. And then it's uncalibrated. So by buying the TV cross grade with this, you can calibrate your video reference display, and then you'll have that relationship you need between the monitor that you're actually doing your editing on, the computer monitor, and the video reference display or monitor that you're feeding your video feed through, so that you can you trust the relationship between them instead of having to say always, well, I know it's always darker and more compressed and a little orange on there. That's really not the best workflow.
We did a big loop from the start of calibrating the autofocus to the light, to the camera, to the monitor, and you took us even further to video. At this point, I think we all understood how these pieces go together. The mortar, as you said, that keeps the bricks together.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think it makes sense to box this so you can go all the way.
Well, that's the whole goal, is to provide people who are interested in doing this type of work with a single product that will provide that type of a solution. Now, Datacolor has just released this product at this show. It is being sold at our German distributor Globel, whose booth is adjacent to ours on the show floor, and they're seeing a lot of interest in this product. So we're very happy that people are beginning to understand the need for capture calibration tools and are looking for products to solve that problem.
Okay, I hope you understood how all these come together brilliantly in this box. Thank you very much for being in the show.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for watching. See you on the next show of Photokina TV.